Patriots, we have breaking developments in one of the most critical Second Amendment cases involving suppressors and the National Firearms Act. And folks, what just happened is absolutely shocking. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals just made a decision that has stunned gun rights advocates across the nation. We're talking about a ruling that could send a man to prison while the Supreme Court is actively reviewing his constitutional case. This is unprecedented. This is controversial, and this has massive implications for every single gun owner in America. Before we dive deep into this explosive story, make sure you smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. We're bringing you the Second Amendment news that mainstream media ignores. Let's get this channel to 750,000 subscribers. Alright, let's break down what's happening because this story has more twists and turns than a Hollywood thriller. The case because you said let me set the stage for you. We're talking about a case called United States v. Peterson, and this case has become ground zero in the fight over suppressor regulations under the National Firearms Act. Here's how this all started. Back in 2022, a massive law enforcement operation descended on Mr. Peterson's home in Louisiana. We're not talking about a couple of officers, we're talking about a federal task force with TF agents and approximately 50 law enforcement officers executing search warrants. Now, Mr. Peterson operated a home-based federal firearms license business. During this raid, authorities claimed they found various compliance issues, some paperwork problems, some record-keeping concerns with Form 4473s, and allegations about firearms traced to crime scenes. But here's what's really important. Out of everything they found, the charge that's causing all this constitutional chaos involves a single item, a solvent trap that was stored in Mr. Peterson's bedroom safe that wasn't registered under the NFA as a suppressor. That's right, folks. One unregistered suppressor component is at the center of a case that could reshape Second Amendment law. Mr. Peterson didn't just roll over. He filed a motion to dismiss the charges based on the Second Amendment. He argued, and this is crucial, that the NFA's suppressor restrictions are unconstitutional. The district court denied his motion. They said, nope, the charge stands. You're going to trial. So Mr. Peterson appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, hoping they would recognize his constitutional rights. The First Fifth Circuit oral ing. Now here's where things get interesting. Initially, a 3-judge panel at the Fifth Circuit reviewed this case under the Biden administration's DOJ, and their ruling was terrible for gun rights. The panel found that suppressors are not protected arms under the Second Amendment. They said, and I quote their reasoning, that a suppressor is not a necessary component of a firearm, required to make the firearm useful or functional. Think about that logic for a second. By that standard, almost nitrogen monoxide firearm accessory would be protected. Scopes? Not necessary. Slings? Not necessary. Extended magazines? Not necessary. This was a dangerous precedent. Gun rights advocates were outraged. Mr. Peterson's legal team immediately began preparing for en banc review. That's when the entire Fifth Circuit, not just 3 judges, reviews the case, but then something unprecedented happened. The Trump DOJ bombshell, when President Trump's Department of Justice took over the case, they did something that shocked everyone. They reversed the government's position. The Trump DOJ filed papers admitting, for the first time, that suppressors are protected arms under the Second Amendment. This was huge. The federal government itself was now acknowledging that suppressors fall under constitutional protection. Now they didn't completely give up. The Trump DOJ still argued that even though suppressors are protected, the NFA regulations could still be constitutional. But this was still a massive shift in legal strategy. This meant the Fifth Circuit had to go back and reconsider the entire case with this new framework. Mr. Peterson's team pulled their en banc petition because they thought, hey, with the government admitting suppressors are protected arms, surely the 3-judge panel will rule in our favor now, right? WRON. The shocking new Fifth Circuit DCI Zion, the 3-judge panel came back with a new ruling. And folks, it's just as bad, maybe even worse than the first one. The panel said, okay, fine, suppressors might be protected arms. But the NFA regulations are still constitutional because they operate as a shall-issue permit system. Let me explain why this is so problematic. The judges referenced language from Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence in the Bruin decision about concealed carry permits. Kavanaugh suggested that objective licensing schemes, things like background checks, fingerprinting, fees, might be permissible for concealed carry, but here's the problem. The Fifth Circuit twisted that language to justify the NFA. They said, well, if we can require permits for carrying guns, we can require registration and a $200 tax stamp for suppressors. This is a massive expansion of permit logic. The NFA isn't just a simple background check. It involves extensive federal registration, $200, tax per item, months of waiting ATF approval, authority potential denial without clear recourse. The Fifth Circuit basically said the government can turn any constitutional right into a heavily regulated privilege, as long as they call it a shall-issue permit. That's insane. Peterson seeks Supreme Court arrivée you after this devastating ruling. Mr. Peterson's legal team had one option left, the Supreme Court of the United States. They informed the Fifth Circuit directly. We are taking this case to SCOTUS. We need you to stay the mandate so Mr. Peterson doesn't have to report to prison while the Supreme Court considers our petition. Now here's what's really important. This motion was unopposed. That means the Trump DOJ, the opposing party, agreed to the stay. They said, yeah, we're fine with Peterson staying out on bond while the Supreme Court looks at this. You would think this would be a no-brainer, right? Unanimous agreement from both parties, Supreme Court review pending, constitutional questions at stake. The Fifth Circuit should have granted the stay immediately. The Fifth Circuit's stunning denial, but they didn't. The Fifth Circuit issued a brief order that simply stated, the appellant's unopposed motion to stay the issuance of the mandate, pending the filing and disposition of the petition for certiorari, is denied. That's it. No explanation. No reasoning. Just denied. Do you understand what this means? Mr. Peterson now faces the very real possibility of being sent to federal prison, while the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, is actively considering whether his conviction is even constitutional. His legal team laid out the stakes clearly in their motion. They explained, Peterson will suffer irreparable harm if required to report to prison during the pendency of his petition. If he were imprisoned before the Supreme Court rules, Peterson could be deprived of his liberty for a conviction and sentence that the Supreme Court would ultimately vacate in their entirety. If they were to rule in his favor, think about that. A man could lose months or even years of his life in federal prison for a conviction that the Supreme Court might completely overturn. The Fifth Circuit knew this. They were told this, and they still denied the stay. This is the kind of judicial decision that makes you question whether courts truly care about justice, or whether they're just going through the motions. What this means for the Second Amendment. Let's zoom out and talk about why this case matters for every gun owner in America. First, if the Fifth Circuit's reasoning stands, it creates a blueprint for gutting the Second Amendment through licensing schemes. The government could require permits, registration, fees, and waiting periods for standard capacity magazine as AR-15s and other modern rifles ammunition. Purchases concealed carry, even in constitutional carry states, any firearm accessory. All they have to do is call it a shall-issue permit, and suddenly, constitutional rights become government-controlled privileges. Second, this case exposes how circuit courts can act as roadblocks to Supreme Court review. Even when both parties agree, even when constitutional rights hang in the balance, circuit courts can refuse to stay mandates and force people into prison before SCOTUS can rule. Third, the National Firearms Act itself is on trial here. The NFA was passed back in 1934, almost a century ago. It was designed to make certain firearms and accessories so expensive and bureaucratic to obtain that average Americans couldn't afford them. It's a tax scheme dressed up as a regulatory framework. If the Supreme Court takes this case and rules in Peterson's favor, it could potentially invalidate major portions of the NFA. We're talking about the $200 tax stamp requirement, the lengthy registration process, the ATF's approval authority, restrictions on suppressors, short-barreled rifles, and more. This is why this case is so important. The path to the Supreme Court, 19 o'clock to 21:30, so where do we go from here? Mr. Peterson's legal team is now filing a petition for certiorari with the Supreme Court. This is the formal request for SCOTUS to take the case and review it, but they're also facing an urgent decision. Should they file an emergency application with the Supreme Court to stay the Fifth Circuit's mandate? An emergency stay would go directly to Justice Alito, who oversees the Fifth Circuit, or potentially to the entire court, they would argue. The Fifth Circuit has denied our stay. Mr. Peterson faces imminent imprisonment. The constitutional questions are serious and substantial. Please grant emergency relief while you consider our SART petition. This is a high-stakes legal gamble. Emergency applications to the Supreme Court are rarely granted. But given the unusual circumstances, the unopposed motion, the Trump DOJ's reversal, the constitutional magnitude, this case might qualify. If the Supreme Court does grant emergency relief, it sends a powerful message. We're taking Second Amendment cases seriously, and we won't let circuit courts railroad defendants while we're considering their appeals. If the Supreme Court takes the case on the merits, we could see oral arguments by next term, with a decision potentially coming in 2026. Broader implications for NFA-CIO in just this case doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are dozens of NFA-related challenges working their way through federal courts right now. Challenges to short-barreled rifle restrictions challenges, to the $200 tax stamp challenges, to the ATF's pistol brace rule challenges to state level, assault weapon bans challenges to magazine capacity. Limits. The legal reasoning in Peterson's case will affect all of these challenges. If the Fifth Circuit's shall issue permit logic becomes accepted precedent, it gives anti-gun judges a roadmap to uphold virtually any gun regulation. They'll just say, well, the Fifth Circuit said licensing schemes are fine, so this law is constitutional. But if the Supreme Court takes this case and reverses the Fifth Circuit, it could create a wave of victories for gun rights. Courts across the country would have to reconsider NFA restrictions and licensing schemes in light of the Supreme Court's guidance. Legal experts are watching this case like hawks. Organizations like the Firearms Policy Coalition, Gun Owners of America, and the Second Amendment Foundation are all tracking these developments closely, political and legal. REAC Tyrants, the response to the Fifth Circuit's denial has been swift and fierce. Gun rights advocates are calling this decision judicial tyranny and a complete abdication of justice. Social media has exploded with criticism of the Fifth Circuit judges who denied the stay. Some legal commentators are questioning whether the Fifth Circuit is intentionally trying to prevent Supreme Court review. By forcing Peterson into prison and creating urgency, they might be hoping he'll give up, or that SCOTUS won't want to take a case with such complicated procedural issues. The Trump administration's position has been interesting. While the DOJ agreed to the stay, they're still defending the NFA regulations as constitutional. This shows the complex political calculations at play. Even a pro-Second Amendment administration has to balance competing interests. What gun owners need to know if you're a gun owner. Here's what you need to understand. First, do not assume that accessories are unregulated just because you think they should be. Until the courts definitively rule, NFA items require compliance with federal law. Second, support legal defense organizations that fight these cases. Groups like FPC, GOA, and SAF need funding to take these battles to the Supreme Court. Third, pay attention to how your circuit court handles Second Amendment cases. The Fifth Circuit was supposed to be one of the good circuits for gun rights, and look what they just did. Fourth, understand that Supreme Court victories take time. Even if SCOTUS takes Peterson's case, we won't see a decision until 2026 at the earliest. Long-term legal strategy is crucial. Fifth, stay informed and stay engaged. Cases like this don't get mainstream media coverage, so you need to follow Second Amendment-focused channels and organizations. CLO all right, Patriots, that's the complete breakdown of this absolutely critical suppressor and NFA case. To recap, Mr. Peterson challenged NFA suppressor restrictions. The Fifth Circuit ruled against him even after the Trump DOJ admitted suppressors are protected arms. Now Peterson is seeking Supreme Court review, but the Fifth Circuit denied his stay, meaning he could go to prison while SCOTUS considers his constitutional case. This is a major development with implications for every gun owner in America. The fight over the NFA, suppressor regulations, and licensing schemes is heading to the Supreme Court. If you found this breakdown helpful, smash that like button. Share this video with every gun owner you know. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss critical Second Amendment news. Leave a comment. Do you think the Supreme Court will take this case? Should Mr. Peterson have to report to prison while his appeal is pending? I want to hear your thoughts. Remember, our constitutional rights are under constant attack. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and never stop fighting for the Second Amendment.